Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Star Wars Ahsoka, episodes 1 and 2. The synopsis on IMDb for the series as a whole reads, after the fall of the Galactic Empire, former Jedi Knight Ahsoka Tano investigates an emerging threat to a vulnerable galaxy. And the synopsis for episode 1 says, a valuable prisoner escapes New Republic custody. A search for answers reunites two old friends. And episode 2, the synopsis reads, Ahsoka and General Hera Syndulla travel to New Republic shipyards and make an unexpected discovery. Okay, so what is this basic animal? What does it feel like? I should first say I haven't seen Star Wars Rebels something whatever that some of these characters appear in. I'm coming in fresh. I don't think that viewers should be expected to have any familiarity with like the animated series that Ahsoka I think was originally part of or introduced in. I think this should be enough, and I think that as far as the story goes, it is enough. They give you enough of what's going on in the background that you don't have to get a big update on what you missed in some animated show or whatever. I also think that the tone is taken mostly seriously, which I appreciate. It does have some brief, sparse moments of lightness, but it's mostly really, I think, endeavoring to take the story and the characters, the situation, the stakes seriously. However, I wouldn't describe it as heavy at all, since most characters kind of keep their emotions buttoned up, and there's not really things that could have been done with the camera work to build a sense of tension, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But this whole idea of characters being really buttoned up emotionally is a problem. It's a problem with Jedi. Luke and Anakin are most interesting because they're not great Jedi. Their emotions often get the better of them, so we engage with and appreciate the struggle to keep emotions in check. I think the same thing is true for the sequel trilogy characters. You had characters that maybe were Force sensitive, but they're learning the Force and they're struggling with their emotions, and we can relate to that struggle. But when you've got Ahsoka, who seems to be pretty disciplined as a Jedi, it's going to feel a bit like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Liam Neeson's character. Can't remember his name. Qui-Gon Jinn, right? Or is that's not a drink? Is it? That's like a real character name? Okay. They really were like doing the Buddhist Zen thing or whatever and trying to keep them, their emotions just always kind of steady. And as a result, they're not really characters that we super connect with, at least not in the original trilogy and I guess Qui-Gon in the prequel trilogy. The story here is, it's kind of a mild mystery with two Sith that are trying to find the exiled Imperial Admiral Thrawn, who was a major villain in classic Star Wars novels that I did read way back in the day, but he was for a time seemingly wiped from continuity. I believe this maybe is his first reintroduction to the continuity. But anyway, the Jedi are trying to track the Sith and uncover their plot as they follow a few steps behind them all the way. Meanwhile, Ahsoka is encouraged by her old friend Hera to reconcile with Sabine, who was Ahsoka's Padawan apprentice before they had a falling out some years ago. So there's this underlying tension and baggage between Ahsoka and Sabine, but it might have been a little too underlying for me. I mean, they largely just kind of look at each other coldly, and when they do kind of do some light barbs toward each other, it's still expressed in a pretty reserved, keeping it cool kind of way. There's also recurring action, but I wouldn't describe it as action heavy. I think that the pacing between plot dialogue scenes and action adventure scenes was comparable to the balance in the movies. So I think it's a pretty good match for Star Wars. As far as the cast goes, I don't have any complaints on the casting, but I would have liked some more emotion in the performances, if you couldn't tell. Since Ahsoka left the Jedi years ago, I think there's room for her to lapse in her emotional self-discipline. And Sabine is a rebellious Jedi dropout, so there's certainly room for her to have more fierce or intense emotional expression. The supporting cast, likewise, all feels very reserved. Some of that, I think, is the acting style. There's something about the way actors do Star Wars roles over the years that I think is actually an artifact of the way movies were made in the 70s, the way acting was in movies in the 70s and in the 80s and stuff. And really a lot of that has not been updated in many iterations of Star Wars content. And I think that's a shame. I think that it would be great to have different types, more grounded acting styles. Or if they wanted to, do bonkers, that wouldn't be something I'd be interested in. But similar to with the MCU how I'd like to see some variety in acting styles. I think I'd like a lot more of that, a lot more freedom for that in Star Wars. Yeah, so the supporting cast likewise all feels pretty reserved. Now, I expect that kind of thing in classic Star Trek, but I really want, like a Luke or a combative Leia Han or Han Chewie kind of dynamic here, or someone getting more frustrated with their droids like Han and Luke used to do, or something, where characters are kind of getting fed up, or there's just a little bit more intensity in the emotion, whether that's played for comedy or for drama. The performances all feel pretty sedate to me. Now, granted, that is mostly again in the writing and the directing, but the performances are just where I'm really noticing it. As far as stunts and visuals, well, not commenting less on the stunts and more on kind of like the visual presentation. Nothing about these episodes rubbed me the wrong way, just in general. Visually, the writing necessary nothing really rubbed me the wrong way, but it felt pretty bland. And I think a lot of it has to do with how it's visually presented. In the 80s through the 2000s, Star Wars was more rare. So seeing this wildly diverse world of all kinds of alien species and creatures and the iconic lightsabers that were so unique to Star Wars, all of those things, seeing them when Star Wars was more rare was enough to be fresh and exciting. But for 10 years, we've gotten lots more Star Wars. And I'm long past ready for this as an intellectual property to be given a stylistic overhaul. Camera work, for starters. Think about this for a minute. I mean, there's mostly standard shots in Star Wars these days with little to no creativity. You do get some exceptions, certainly, but the norm is not stylistic creativity in how these things are shot. Like a shot from under the table or from off to the side somewhere where there's a little bit of plants or foliage or something in the way, stuff that you see in TV all the time. Or a shot that's like dramatic and directly overhead characters that are walking and it's following them for this kind of grand stylized entrance of a character. We just don't see those kinds of things that are so common in all kinds of filmmaking today. Even something as simple as slow motion is almost never employed in Star Wars. There's so much, I think, that could be added to Star Wars in creating, in creative shooting, in creative editing. As it is, still using a lot of old school traditional, the wipe transitions that Star Wars is kind of known for, that I don't think it needs to be. These very standard camera setups. Okay, set the cameras up next to the actors, just like we're standing in the room, and action, and that's just very kind of standard setups from the 70s and 80s. It just feels very stale and pedestrian to me. Imagine what Star Wars could look like if it was directed by a stylistic director like Zack Snyder. I know he's divisive, so you can pick another stylistic director if you don't like Zack Snyder. But imagine if we did see a Zack Snyder Star Wars movie. Well, we may not have to, in one sense. Anybody see that Rebel Moon trailer yet? I'm really, look out, Star Wars. Anyway, okay, themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in this that would maybe trigger some worthwhile thought or contemplation or conversation? Reconciliation seems to be the biggest theme here so far, but the basis for that reconciliation is unclear. The messaging, if there is any, seems to be that reconciliation happens when both people are ready, but what makes them ready? Ahsoka only offers vaguely that, you just know. And what I'm questioning at this point is, okay, is this what the writers believe about reconciliation, or is this a character flaw that Ahsoka needs to recognize and overcome? That you don't just wait until, you just know that you're ready. You just step into the discipline of reconciliation, So I don't know exactly what kind of messaging is going to be there. It's unclear to me what side, if any, the show is going to take. Time will tell. As Christians, our basis for reconciliation is largely, not exclusively, because there is some other factors involved, but it's largely based in Christ's forgiveness, which first reconciles us to God. And we are meant as believers to recognize, as the psalmist does, that when people sin against other people, they are first and foremost sinning against God, who loves each individual far more than anyone else in the world loves them and fiercely desires for them to be treated with respect and dignity. And so when God sees that happening to anybody, we're all made in the image of God. And so when we commit a sin against someone else, we're committing a sin against an image bearer of God. And so there's on multiple levels reason for God to be angry at the mistreatment of a person. And we first and foremost wrong him when we wrong someone else. So our basis for forgiveness is found in letting go of our felt need to pay back those who hurt us and instead leave it to God to make all things just, because he is the primary party that has been wronged. In fact, the psalmist says, "Against you, you only have I sinned," when he was recalling what horrible things he had done to someone else. And I don't think it means literally that we haven't wronged other people, but it's just like by comparison, it's against God and God alone that we sin. And so, God is going to be completely just, and we're all going to give an account to him eventually. And God will respond perfectly and justly. And so the basis for forgiveness is to recognize, I can leave this in God's hands. I do not need to hold on to this myself and have this felt need to pay back this person who has wronged me, because there will be perfect justice in the end. Forgiveness and reconciliation, though, I want to say, are weighty and they're complex issues. There's so much more that needs to be said in a different context than a TV show review. But I wanted to highlight these elements in the story because they are worth watching to see how they're handled in Star Wars Ahsoka going forward. I think they're worth contemplating and working through ourselves. And we can use shows like this that play with that theme a little bit to remind us, to think about, what are my thoughts on reconciliation and forgiveness? Is there anyone in my life that I need to reconcile with or that I need to forgive? And how do I work through that as a believer in Christ? So those opportunities in shows like this are there, regardless of what the beliefs of the show writers are, to trigger something in us that could really be worthwhile. Anyway, I have no idea what your tastes are in TV shows, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. It's a step up from being actively irritating to you, but it just doesn't quite make the journey too interesting. This one is rated TV 14 for intense violence, and those are all of my thoughts for now on Star Wars Ahsoka Episodes 1 and 2. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell, do the stuff to stay connected, to share the content. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then, as always, I hope you check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.